Okay. Sorry.
I don't
You
know.
were just, does that mean?
Maybe a little.
Okay. I'm going to have Scott lead us in prayer, but he wasn't sitting here. I just want to make sure. A couple people, Kay isn't on today. Kay and build a new house in Virginia, in Sargent, and her house has, some water damage, but the house is between Virginia's house and Kay's house. A couple of them were completely destroyed, and there was all of the RVs in town, and those of us who live here know what that looks like. They're all turned over sideways. V had, she has made Sargent her art studio, but since she had all her art down here for the art festival, it was all in her car. And so when she went there, she didn't unload it. She kept it in her car. So she has damage that will probably be below her deductible. So she says she's good, but Sargent's a mess. That's got to be scary for Kay, who just built a house and has to deal with that aftermath. And obviously people that we don't know there that are dealing with that. Let me see a couple of other things. Update and got an update from Robin that her brother-in-law is starting radiation this week and has been fighting an infection, and pray that he is able to do radiation and to be able to tolerate it. I did not get an update from Cheryl. We've been praying for her neighbor. Do you want to unmute for a second, Cheryl? Is there any update on Glenn?
He is currently doing much better. Still in the hospital, obviously, but they're weaning him off of the breathing machine and the sedation. So short bursts of taking him off of the machine. So
Gotcha, thank you. And another person to add, I know Anita asked for prayers a couple of weeks ago for Lori Fisher. She lives in Rockport. She's a silversmith that many of you know. She has stage 4 breast cancer that is now been diagnosed as bone cancer, and she is going to MD Anderson for her appointment on the 19th. And she's also going through a lot of things in her personal life. So please keep her in her prayers. I did tell her that our group was praying for her and would keep praying for her. And she said that meant a lot. So those are the ones that are on this list. Sorry.
How do we not mention yesterday? If you read all the commentary on it, the thing you have to see is the only thing that's going to change this stuff is a change of hearts. Politics isn't working, and we practice what we do as believers mostly one-on-one. There may be some people out there that can change hearts on a mass scale. I haven't met them. And so the change of hearts, by and large, come one-on-one. You see these things and you think there's got to be some way to change it. And again, remember that when Jesus came, he didn't set everything right. He says, I'm going to come back. I'm going to set everything right. But until then, you're going to have brother against brother, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. And we were told to expect it. We were told that's the way it is. We each have a job to do. And again, it's practiced mostly one-on-one. So we're glad to see all of you here. That's all I've got to say about that. God, we struggle at times. We see around us so much hurt. So many people that need the peace that you bring, that peace that passes all understanding. And we feel helpless and confused. And you left words for us to prepare us and to remind us of our place in it. We are helpless except through you. Help us to accept that. To remember to turn to you first. These ones that we pray for, you know how important that is. We begin to learn how important that is. So many people are reminded to turn to you in some of the most difficult times. Let us be that reminder too, when those times come. To turn people both your direction, but also to be your hands and feet the way you intended. Always be with us as we study, to find those examples and the teachings that you put here for us. Amen.
And I didn't say, Kathy isn't here today, and she hasn't been here the last couple of times. Life is really hard with taking care of Alton right now, so please keep Kathy and Alton in your prayers. We are studying Esther. So this is the fourth woman we have studied in the Old Testament, and it's going to be our last in this sort of study. And why? Just a reminder why we studied women in the Old Testament. First was to sort of dismiss the idea that women are not in the Bible and they aren't important. And as we've done these studies, we have found these women in the Old Testament have some amazing stories. And just to remind us, we studied Deborah, we have studied Rahab, we've studied Ruth, and now we're on the book of Esther. And to give you a timeline, Ruth lived in about 1100 BC, and Esther, we know exactly when this took place because it talks about in Esther, we will see in the first chapter, the first verse, I believe, that it was during King Xerxes' reign, and he reigned from 486 BC to 465 BC. So we're 500 years after Ruth, and we're 500 years before Jesus was born, just to give you an idea of where we are. And we're going to read, one of the things we talked about is, and Scott put out a video this week that had a clip from The Chosen that didn't get.
If you didn't watch it, I hope you do. It's going to shed a little light on how Ruth was done, how it was carried down orally and still was kept accurate. And it'll make a lot more sense.
And what I was going to say is the book of Esther, this story was told orally and is still told orally and acted out.
Every year, the Feast of Purim.
And we'll talk about that at the end of this book. So these are both Ruth and Esther are two of the stories that are so breaded into Jewish culture as far as being important. And just to give an idea, so this took place after the Babylonian exile. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I this is a spoiler alert. We decided that if we waited to tell this part, then you'd have to try and go back and work it into what you've already heard. So there's going to come a point in this book of Ruth, Esther, I mean, where there's a guy who hates the Jews. He wants to get rid of, he wants to have killed all of the Jews in Xerxes' empire. Okay, that's not unthinkable to begin with. We see it today, from the river to the sea. This is not the first time anybody has thought about killing all the Jews. But what makes this so interesting, at least to me, the guy, this official who wants to kill all the Jews, they refer to him as an Agagite, A-G-A-G-ite. Agag was this king that Saul, the first king of Israel, was supposed to dispose of. And instead, he carried him back, left him alive, left all the people alive. The Agagites are actually Amalekites. When someone gets real important, they'll name people after them. But Amalekites, Amalek, that they're named after, was the grandson of Esau. Do you remember Jacob and Esau? You remember Jacob steals Esau's birthright, and there's this fight between them forever? Later on in the New Testament, what you find out is that feud between Jacob and Esau is still going on, because Jesus is a descendant of David, which runs back through Jacob, and Herod, King Herod, is a descendant of Esau. This enmity between them pops up over and over and over again. And this is one of those times, and you won't be aware of it in the story unless you know that Amalekites, Amalek, is the grandson of Esau. So what we have here is, in addition to what you hear in the story, is this enmity between Jacob and Esau that never goes away. It gets carried down for millennia, and pops out around the crucifixion between actually Jesus and Herod. So you want to keep that in mind. This problem is more than just one guy who doesn't like another guy. This is much bigger and much deeper than that.
Can you talk a little bit about the Babylonian exile and how not everybody came back?
When we studied Daniel, the Jews get carried away into Babylon, into captivity.
For 70 years.
And Daniel has a dream, a vision, a prophecy, and he sees this giant statue with the head of gold, the chest of bronze, you understand, and he tells the king, you're a great king, but when you're gone, this kingdom you run is going to get replaced by other people. And the next one in line are known as the Medes and the Persians, all right? So Babylon has fallen. The Medes and the Persians, exactly the way Daniel predicted, are now the dominant force in the area. The Jews have been carried off into Babylon. And what the king, and all of a sudden Nebuchadnezzar, had done was he carried off the princes and the princesses and the leaders, the important people, and he brought them to Babylon, and he treated them like kings. He gave them Babylonian royal names, and he basically kind of bought their loyalty. They started thinking, hey, this Babylon thing is not too bad. Well, we're just going to stay here. So they left a lot of the poor people back in what we call Israel. They left them there, but they were, scattered and weak. But when it came time that the Jews had a chance to go from Babylon back to Israel, a whole bunch of them just didn't go. A whole bunch of them said, we like the comforts of Babylon, thank you. We'll just be staying. And so now Babylon has fallen, and this kingdom has come in, and the Medes and Persians, and those Jews just sort of went along with it. I mean, they didn't fight. This is still more comfortable than being nomads back home, or living the way we live. So there are a lot of Jews living inside this kingdom. There are quite a lot of them, and some still maintain the traditions and the worship, and a lot of them don't. A lot of them have adopted so that's what we have going on at this point. I guess the one last thing I would say is this King Xerxes. When we talked about him, I want you to think about him as a frat boy. Okay, this is a young guy who has effectively inherited a kingdom. This is a trust fund baby. This is somebody who is just the bad boy, and he's loving it. Mary and I laughed, and I always hate to say this, But if somehow, this is not political, this is, you'll see,
This is just
but
fun,
if
okay?
somehow Joe Biden could pass along the kingship to Hunter Biden, Hunter Biden would be like Xerxes, okay? You can't get enough cocaine or hookers to satisfy this. So, I mean, he's just going to be, and he's going to have a whole bunch of his friends around him, and they're going to say, you know what we should do? We should have a party. And Hunter would say, yeah, we should have a party. I got a lot of money, and we'll just do that. And you're going to see that going on in this story too. Xerxes is weak. He's like a frat boy, and
his father was King Darius.
King Darius.
Darius. And so King Darius was a powerful king. He's died. He's given it to King Xerxes. King Xerxes is a frat boy. I mean, just keep that in mind when you listen to the story.
And it'll help a lot of the rest of what goes on make sense. He keeps advisors around him that tell him all the fun things he wants to hear.
Okay, so reading, yes.
These are nice historical facts.
Correct?
What is the religious
Of this
Why are
story?
we learning from this circumstance? The Jews are not together. Some obey, some don't. They intermarry, all that other stuff. But what's the point here of the Sabbath?
I feel like we should at least read a few paragraphs before we start. But there are a number of purposes to this. Actually, you're going to see, strangely, the book of Esther never says the word God, never says the word Yahweh once.
In 10 chapters, God is never mentioned.
And yet he's
all about
very,
God.
very strongly inferred. He's very strongly, it's clear that it's their faith driving them, but the book never actually says the word. That's an interesting thing, I think. What you do see is that we have a purpose. If you need some quick answer to this, is that we have a purpose. And there's a point where Esther is actually told, perhaps you were made, perhaps you were born for such a time as this. It's a thing that we should consider. And when I talked about what happened yesterday, we have a place, we have a purpose. It is not always grand, and yet it's very, very important. And sometimes small things turn out to be big things. So I guess if there's one overriding message, maybe that's it. But I think, oddly, we should see God's hand in, just like we did in Ruth. Those inferences in Ruth are there on purpose. If you didn't watch the video that includes that scene from The Chosen, watch it, because those people understood. They were very close to that story. We have to work a little harder, but those people understood that God's hand was all over the story of Ruth. And you're going to see that God's hand, all of these coincidences that keep happening, right? We're supposed to get that God has a hand in this. And it turns out to be to the great salvation of what we call Israel.
And I think the idea that God can use all of us, no matter, and the story of Esther is wonderful. So with that, Esther.
So, and if you need something shorter than that, how about get about your business?
Yeah.
That's, if there's a message, it probably is you've got stuff to do, get about your business.
Esther 1. This is what happened in the days of Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Kush. In those days, King Xerxes sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. The geographic area?
Yeah, it's Iran. It's in modern day Iran. It's actually not that far. When Jacob goes back to his father's, or his mother's homeland, it's not too far from there. It's up in Iran.
Okay. In the 3rd year of his reign, Xerxes held a feast.
Oh wait, I should mention, it talks about he reigned from India to Kush. India, and you know how big it is, and up into Persia. But Kush is northern Africa. So he's running a kingdom that runs all the way from India and Iran and those places, all the way down through what Israel, the Holy Land, and down into northern Africa, 127 provinces. This is one of the larger empires the world has ever known.
Mary, are you in Esther,
Yeah, and so this,
chapter 1?
it is, and some of the words are different. If you're listening to different translations on this one, it calls Xerxes something else. So you might want to listen.
Anatarchus or something.
Anatarchus in this sense, because when we listen to Pastor Paul, he was reading a different translation. So the translations are different, especially at the beginning of it, Mario.
I guess we're going to have to take just a little bit more time to set the stage. When Daniel, remember the Jews were taken to Babylon, Daniel's name is Daniel, but Nebuchadnezzar gave him a Babylonian name, and it was Belteshazzar. So it's really common, especially for the Jews, to also have a name from the new country. So maybe it's a little confusing. It's understood, though, this is the same guy.
Verse 3. In the 3rd year of his reign, Xerxes held a feast for all his officials and servants. The military leaders of Persia and Media were there, along with the nobles and princes of the provinces. And for a full 180 days, he displayed the glorious riches of his kingdom and the magnificent splendor of his greatness. At the end of this time, in the garden court of the royal palace, the king held a 7-day feast for all the people in the citadel of Susa, from the least to the greatest. Hangings of white and blue linen were fastened with cords of fine white and purple material to silver rings on the marble pillars. Gold and silver couches were arranged on the mosaic pavement of porphyry marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Beverages were served in an array of goblets of gold, each with a different design, and the royal wine flowed freely according to the king's bounty. By order of the king, no limit was placed on the drinking, and every official of his household was to serve each man whatever he desired.
So Xerxes gets control of things, and he sends out to all the important people in all of his 127 provinces. He says, you guys come to the capital where we are going to have a party. And he wants to show off how rich and powerful he is. All of these people are his subjects.
For 6 months.
But it helps if they know that you're very rich and powerful. It's a lot easier to keep an ally if they think there's something in it for them. So he shows off the capital, Susa, for 6 months. He lets them I'm sure he gives them quarters to stay in, and they, guides to go tour around town and all the stuff that comes with it. 6 months of him showing off the wealth and splendor of his kingdom, of his capital. And then at the end of the 6 months, at the end of the 180 days, he has a week-long bash. This is the fruition of the 6 months. They have a party to end all parties. Anything you want to eat, I have concierges run around. You want him to go catch a lobster or whatever. And it says that the wine flowed freely, that the stewards, the people who were in charge of bringing people wine, were to give everybody who asked whatever they asked for. And wine's expensive. Wine is a precious commodity. And for instance, you might save your best wine for the royal family. And what Xerxes says is, if they ask for it, you give it to them, and you give them as much as they want, and you don't question that they might have already had enough, right? This is a week-long blowout bash, and you see he brings in, he's got his close advisors there. And it says that people began feeling happy.
I know we haven't
read it yet. I'm sorry. I love to get ahead.
Yes.
Anyway.
Carol
This
has a question.
Yeah.
I do have something to say.
Okay.
I noticed on the end of my translation, the queen gave a banquet for the women in the palace.
Have you read that yet?
No, that's what I'm reading next.
I'm sorry.
What? That's what I'm reading next. I'm just on that
Oh,
sentence,
okay,
okay.
mine at the end.
Okay, yeah, it's 9, so I'm on verse 9 now.
Okay.
Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he ordered the 7 eunuchs who served him, Mehuman,
Just skip the names.
okay, thanks, to blah, 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 to Queen Vashti before him, wearing her royal crown to display her beauty to the people and officials, for she was beautiful to behold. Queen Vashti, however, refused to come at the king's command brought by his eunuchs, and the king became furious and his anger burned within him.
So these people are good and loaded.
But they're having a girls' party and a boys' party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they've had a lot of wine. This has been going on for a better part of a week.
But the point is that this still goes on today. There's a men's party and the women's.
Oh, I was about to
okay.
say that. They have, this was the men's party, yes. And the queen in the palace has the women's party. And I'm sure that it was elaborate too, but you can't overlook the drunk frat boys that as the drinking wears on, I'm sure some discussion comes up and Xerxes says, oh, well, I'm going to show you my queen. And he's going to bring her from the palace where she's entertaining all of these noble women and strut her around like, I don't know what, but he's going to bring her out. There's some people who believe when he says he's going to show off her beauty, that it means he's going to have her without a veil. And I think that's a good possibility that that's what that means. Whatever, and whether she doesn't want to be strutted around like a piece of meat. And yes, they are having a men's party and a women's party.
And her point, they
And
still
your point
today.
is, in the Middle East, they still do that?
They still do that.
Yeah, they do.
They do not window for their celebration.
When we were in Jordan, we took a trip into Petra and into Jordan. Our tour guide explained to us that the Arab word for a good wife and the Arab word for a good camel is the same word. That's true. And so the men's party and the women's party. And so you get the thing. There are all these drunken men entitled to everything. And the king says, come on out here, let me show you off. And Queen Vashti says, I draw the line there. I'm not doing it. And it may well be that he's going to have her, come in and show her off without a veil. Let me show you what I get to see behind the veil. Queen Vashti says, not happening. The eunuchs, we hear about eunuchs, and I know a lot of you understand what eunuch is, but the idea is that these men have no testosterone anymore, zero, none. And the theory is that's going to make them less aggressive and less likely to want to challenge the king. And so they use eunuchs as servants. They use eunuchs to oversee the harem, the king's concubines, because they're eunuchs. They're no threat to anybody. So he has eunuchs that he sends into the palace where Queen Vashti is, and they kind of are speaking with the voice of the king himself, and she says no. And now what you have to picture is a whole bunch of drunken frat boys, people who do have a lot of testosterone, and he's humiliated in front of his buds. This woman says, I'm not going to do what you tell me. How can you stand that kind of an insult? And that's what comes next.
Verse 13. Then the king consulted the wise men who knew the times, for it was customary for him to confer with the experts in law and justice. His closest advisors were Karshina, Shethar,
drop that.
okay, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had personal access to the king and ranked highest in his kingdom. According to the law, he asked, what should be done with Queen Vashti, since she refused to obey the command of King Xerxes delivered by the eunuchs? And in the presence of the king and his princes, Memucan replied, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but all the princes and the people in all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the conduct of the queen will become known to all women, causing them to despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she did not come.
Let's stop right there if we can.
Okay.
So he goes and consults his inner circle, his entourage. That's what we'd call it today. This is the Hollywood star, and he's got an entourage of people that he keeps around that are just kind of, they tell him what he wants to hear. But he says, oh, what should we do with it? According to the law of the Medes and Persians was such, they had a book called the Book of the Chronicles. And if it gets written in the Book of the Chronicles, even the king can't undo it. Okay? That's the way their law works. And this advisor, the 7 advisors, one of them steps up and says, well, let me tell you, she didn't just insult you, she insulted everybody. She insulted all of us men here, because what's going to happen? Our wives are going to get wind of this, and if if Vashti can stand up to the king himself, what are our wives going to do? They're going to think they have the right to not do what we order them to do. This is exactly what it looks like. And remember, it's the Medes and Persians. But do you remember at the end of Ruth, do you remember how I told you Boaz sort of manipulated that legal meeting? This guy has manipulated this situation, because now Xerxes, if he doesn't take action, is going to be humiliated. He's going to look weak. And the guy makes sure that you understand, this isn't just an insult to you. You're going to mess up. You've sent a message with this that the women don't have to follow orders, and it's going to affect all of our households. And so,
Yes.
Scott, is there any significance of the experts in law and justice?
in law and justice, no, but there is a little extra significance in that it says that they know the times. And I spent some time with that, and it means kind of what it sounds like. They're people that are politically astute. These are people who know the law, because like you got to, the Book of the Chronicles, but they also understand which way the wind blows. That's in there for a reason. They're culture influencers. They're the ones who understand how the wind blows. So the law and justice is separately, I don't know. I think that's just a term people use. Justice is a long way from the law sometimes. Yeah.
Verse 18, this very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard about the queen's conduct will say the same thing to all the king's officials, resulting in much contempt and wrath. So if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be recorded in the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti shall never again enter the presence of King Xerxes, and that her royal position shall be given to a woman better than she. The edict the king issues will be heard throughout his vast kingdom, and so all the women, from the least to the greatest, will honor their husbands. The king and his princes were pleased with this counsel, so the king did as Memucan had advised. He sent letters to all the provinces of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be master of his own household.
There you go. At the very end, I almost wanted to skip to the end of the chapter and work backwards. That's what's really going on here. That's what's at play. The king winds up sending a decree. We'll go back, but the king sends out a decree
To 127 provinces and umpteen languages.
that says that every man should be master in his own household. This is a kingdom being run by a frat boy and his buddies. It is, and you can't ignore that in this. They have decided, and so what this guy tells him, First, I told you he sets him up and says, look, he's insult. I mean, he's messed up every bar. She's messed up everybody's life. You've insulted us as well. So here's what you need to do. You need to issue a decree and you need to record it in the book of Chronicles. Remember, I told you that. And that means once it's recorded, it can't be repealed. And he's doing this in front of everybody. And he says, what you're going to say is she is kicked out. The way this works is the king has a queen, but he also has a harem of concubines. And the concubines, in fact, even the queen, they're not allowed to enter his presence unless they're called out by name. He'll say, send so-and-so over. The queen may have a little more latitude, but we're going to see probably not much. And so if you cut her off, she can never come into the presence of royal Xerxes ever again. And not only that, we're going to find out, he says, we're going to get you a new queen that's a lot more worthy, but you're going to send out this decree that says each man is the master of his own house.
And this is all because the queen wouldn't walk around, parade around herself in front of a bunch of drunk guys that have
That's
been
pretty
drunk for a week.
That's pretty much it.
That's the way to make public policy.
But isn't that redundant? What's going on in that time in history? Every man knew that he was the master of his home. I mean, why are we doing it?
Yes and no. There's theory and there's reality. And you know, the women have more influence over, even in those times, than, you know, maybe we're led to believe. By sending this thing out the way they do, you know, the way he does, and recording it, that each man is master in his own house, it's basically saying, don't you dare get uppity, because now it's a royal decree. And if I want to, I can just have you killed. And they did have some compunction. They did have some rules about killing people for no real cause. But now here's a real cause. This is designed to make sure that the women stay in their place. And yes, they're the master of their own household, but there is still a great deal of influence. This is designed, this is just something done in a fit of drunken, you know, this sounds like a good thing to do.
The things that were cultural, and now we've written it down in this bizarre law.
Queen Vashti felt like she could get by with saying, I'm not going to come to your party. You know, she thought she could do that. And they said, whoa, that's a slippery slope. We're not going to let this continue. Literally. It's what's, you know, was it over the top? Was it unnecessary? Yeah, I guess it was. We've set the stage for what's going to happen.
Chapter 2. Sometime later, when the anger of the king Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her.
And that that's just that one sentence. Sometime later, when his rage had subsided, and you can absolutely understand that means when the hangover wore off, the party is over, and he remembered Queen Vashti and what had gone on. It's like, oh man, I kind of liked her. She was, you know, she got picked because she's one of the most beautiful women anywhere. And he gets to show off, and he's like, oh man, you know, I can't even call her in you know, now because she is prohibited from being here. And it shows that he remembered it, and it's like, oh yeah, what are you gonna do? I guess there's gonna be some consolation for him.
I don't. It doesn't settle right with me that this will purposely the act of the king because they were drunk. I mean, like, I don't have, you know, I was drunk, I'm not responsible for what I did. Now when he's sober, now he's thinking, I don't.
Well,
All I used to say, even the drunk won't keep fine.
this is a pagan king, and certainly things like this are not out of the ordinary, or not, you know, they're not unheard of. But you notice we get a whole lot of clues. The wine flowed freely. They were told to fill the cup anytime somebody asked, and it says when everybody is feeling merry. the way that's phrased, it means that they're all pretty juiced up. You know, is it the only thing responsible? I don't know. Does and I hate to say this, Robin Williams said that cocaine doesn't make you do anything except be more of what you already are. And he was an expert. So did the wine make him do this? The wine didn't make him do it. Maybe it just made him loose enough to do, you know, to do what he wanted to do. But I think we're splitting hairs.
I'm also concerned if there's that message to the rest of us. You just can't get drunk and do what you want today. I mean, you got responsibility.
I would hope that by the time we're done, nobody takes that message from this, Gene. I don't think this is here to be considered a shining example for how we should behave. We haven't even mentioned Esther yet, and the book is named Esther. So let's wait around at least, but we are really not supposed to look at this and get the idea this is an okay thing.
He is not a good king. He is not a good king. He was given the king, his father, whether you like Darius or not, he was an effective king. This guy, he inherited it. He inherited all this riches, and he's not good.
This party and this decree is about as good as it gets from Xerxes. If you think this is bad, wait, because it just doesn't get, it gets worse than this pretty shortly. So I don't think there's an example to us, but it probably is an example of the things that we see when we deal with powerful people. I mean, you know, we see a lot of excesses. Yes, Mario.
So, but we're still talking about a pagan person.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so I can understand something of what Gene's trying to infer, that I don't think they had a high opinion of women and you know what they thought or said or whatever. And maybe she went above her means because she thought she was the queen, blah blah blah. Okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But also, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how Esther must be part of his concubine service.
Not
Not
yet.
yet. We're gonna
Yeah,
get
we're
there.
gonna get there. Okay, so I don't. So, but she's a Jew.
She is that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So
The one thing, I don't know, maybe I'm still not showing this right. This is not supposed to be a story about the Medes and the Persians or about Xerxes. This is somebody looking in through the windows. This is us looking in. We're not supposed to be in the room because they probably thought they were, you know, what we're doing is just fine. But us watching from, looking in through the window, we can see this through that lens that says this is bad.
I don't disagree with that, but I'm wondering if there's the message coming that the Almighty saw all of this, and it was a mess, and buddy, it cost me my son, my only begotten son, 500 years ago. Isn't that the contrast that we're supposed to also pick up? And but for that, maybe we'll delay Jesus coming a little longer.
Well, you know, that's stuff that I can't even comment on. I don't know. Let's watch this story unfold, and some of it's going to make better sense.
Verse 2 of chapter 2. Then the king's attendants proposed, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king, and let the king appoint commissioners in each province of his kingdom to assemble all the beautiful young women into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the women, and let them be given beauty treatments. Then let the young women who please the king become queen in place of Vashti. This suggestion pleased the king, and he acted accordingly.
Do you see the pattern developing here? His advisors say,
Oh,
You
don't
know,
be sad.
yeah, oh, you know what we should do is we should gather up a whole bunch of the most beautiful virgins in your kingdom for you. And not only that, you should set up a caretaker, an overseer, a commissioner of the young virgins in every province. So he's going to add a full-time job in all 127, it is 127,
Yes.
right? All 127 provinces of a guy who's just there to oversee the gathering and picking of the most beautiful virgins to bring back. And Xerxes hears that plan and says, I like it.
Was there any doubt?
You really have to see that in this story. I mean, we are being told just that. And you're seeing that, I mean, if, God, I hate to keep coming back because it's real, but if Hunter Biden was in this position, I'm
Yeah,
telling you,
he'd
we
say-
have actual pictures of him smoking crack with a hooker, okay? What would happen if he was made king? It would look like this. There's nobody to second guess Xerxes, and he's got these people saying, I know what will make him happy. Let's do this. And he says, good, let's appoint a commissioner of virgins in every province so that we're sure we get the best. This is a mess of a story so far.
Now there was a citadel of Susa. Now there was at the citadel of Susa a Jewish man from the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish. He had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jeconiah, king of Judah. And Mordecai had brought up Jedasha, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, because she did not have a father or a mother. The young woman was lovely in form and appearance, and when her father and mother had died, Mordecai had taken her in as his own daughter.
So again, we'll start with one little element of it. Her Hebrew name is Hadassah, right? We know her as Esther. They give them a new name. They get their what we would consider foreign name. She's still Hadassah. So when Mordecai is viewing her, he sees her always as Hadassah, right? And yet, when we switch around perspective to the people in the kingdom, they see her as Esther. But anyway, this is setting the stage. Mordecai is, he's from the tribe of Benjamin. We lay all that in advance. And there's this young girl whose parents have both died. It says Mordecai was carried into exile, into Babylon. That means he's old. He stayed in Babylon the whole time Nebuchadnezzar was there. And then in the overthrow by the Medes and Persians, he's still around. And so he's old. These generations can get deceptively long. You know, you have men, the wife dies, he gets a new wife, has a few children, he gets a new wife, has a few children, and you get a generation where you have somebody, a child that's maybe 30 years younger than the older sibling. And you can have an uncle. Well, we have in our family, our oldest, Amanda, has an aunt who's younger than her because her grandfather was one of these guys that gets a new wife and has new kids. So what we do know is he's old. And when this she's a relative, and when her parents both die, as we've said, she's sort of in a bad way. So he takes her in and adopts her and becomes her father.
What is her legal name?
Her legal name?
Hadassah.
Hadassah?
Is that Star?
It may be, I forgot, to be honest.
Is that a clue that's coming in the next chapter?
No, it's just a name. And they aren't always that way. We do tend to want to name, now we name our kids acetaminophen or something, but we used to like to give our kids names that would reflect well on them, or the name of an ancestor who we loved, and we would name our children after that. Some names are just names. And I might as well, how about this? If you go to a different country and your name is Bob, what does Bob mean? Does it mean like a bobber's, does your hair cut short in a bob? Bob doesn't mean anything to them. It's not a name in their language. You can't give that person a name that means the same thing as Bob. So you give them a name in your language. You pick out a suitable name and you say, here, some names mean something. Bob, for instance, doesn't mean very much. And and no offense to all the Bobs out there, but I'm sorry, it's the first one that came to mind. Scots know, but that's how a lot of the time how names are. When they get their Babylonian name, they're going to give them a name that means something to them. And I bring it up because people seem to put a lot of importance in the names. Sometimes the name is just a name.
So then Esther's parents were some of these Jews that were taken by Nebuchadnezzar. They were the elites, and so unfortunately her parents died, and Mordecai steps in. So Esther is not in Jerusalem or in Israel; she's in Babylon.
Esther has spent her entire life. It's no longer Babylon; it's Susa, because but Esther has spent her entire life as sort of an exile, the descendant of exiles from the Holy Land.
When the king's command and edict had been proclaimed, many young women gathered at the citadel of Susa under the care of Haggai. Esther was also taken to the palace and placed under the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. And the young woman pleased him and obtained his favor, so he quickly provided her with beauty treatments and the special diet. He assigned to her 7 select maidservants from the palace and transferred her with them to the best place in the harem. Esther did not reveal her people or her heritage because Mordecai had instructed her not to do so. And every day, Mordecai would walk back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn about Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. In the 12th month before her turn to go to King Xerxes, the harem regulation required each woman to receive beauty treatments with oil of myrrh for 6 months, and then with perfumes and cosmetics for another 6 months. When the young woman would go to the king, she was given whatever she requested to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. She would go there in the evening, and in the morning she would return to the second harem under the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of concubines. She would not return to the king unless he delighted in her and summoned her by name.
That's a lot. I can't remember all that. She's poking me. No, we have to go the rest of the way. We can't stop there. I'm on a roll. So this is the way this works. And if it sounds a little sick, yeah, okay, but I'm sorry, this is the way it works. The king has a queen. She's the number one, and she's actually the wife. But then he has concubines. He has a harem. This at that time is fairly common. And the way this works is they'll bring in a new candidate, and they have a year-long process. Life was hard. People's, that weren't wealthy, their skin and everything else, they would treat them with oil of myrrh for 6 months just to soften them up. And I'm going to get in trouble for this. Why do women grow their fingernails long and paint them? Do you know the history? What's that?
What did you say?
I said he's gonna get poked really.
The origin of this is that very wealthy women, it was a sign, it was a way to show off, I can afford not to go out and work in the fields. I'm wealthy, and I can grow my fingernails long and not break them, and I can paint them as an ornament. That's the origin. I'm not saying now, but that's where it came from. A lot of women had a really hard life, so they would bring them into the palace, rub them down with oils and stuff, and clear up their skin, and then the next 6 months they'd treat them with perfumes and teach them how to walk and how to proper etiquette at the table. I don't know what all. This is a finishing school, but they make them look beautiful for the king. They're finally called. They're brought in for a single night with the king, and it's everything it sounds like. And then the next morning, they've been in the harem with the virgins, the untouched women. They spend one night with the king, and then they're taken to the other harem where the concubines stay. And they may never, ever see the king again. It's possible. The only way they ever get to come back is if they please the king and he calls for them by name. This is not an example. This is for us to see how messed up this situation is. But that's the way this works. So it's her turn. Before it's her turn, she does all the preparation, but you notice that the eunuch who is in charge of those young women likes her. And immediately it says earlier that she's beautiful of face and beautiful of form, but he likes her. And he says, oh dear, he's going to like you, right? And if you're the eunuch in charge of that, you want to bring the king women that he likes. And he says, I know his taste. He is going to love you. He assigns women to take care of her from the beginning, and he immediately starts her on the beauty treatments. This is like the sickest audition for The Bachelor you've ever seen. This is exactly what's going on, and they're being prepared. But Esther's special, and so he immediately gets her into the program and begins her preparation.
And Mordecai, remember, is walking out in front every day and trying to, talk to someone and say, how's Esther doing?
We think that Mordecai, her dad, her uncle, her dad, is some kind of a palace employee, a gatekeeper. He's not one of the inner circle, but we think he probably works at the palace. He's there at the gate every day. These kings would have people who come to them to have things adjudicated, this land deal or whatever. Well, you're going to have a gatekeeper. You're going to have somebody that says, okay, you go in the line right now. You guys are on standby. And we think Mordecai was probably someone like that because he's always there at the gate. He's always getting news from inside the palace, and he's keeping an eye to try and find out how is Esther doing up there.
And in spite of the fact that they're exiled from Jerusalem, I'm sure that they're not the only exiles living in Babylon, because they would make a point of, when they were on top, they would gather people from all nations, wherever they were ruling. So why does Mordecai tell her, don't let them know who you really are?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I would have forgotten to bring that up. Mordecai tells her, don't tell anybody you're a Jew. They are not the only nation, the only people that are living in this big conglomerate. There are a lot of people have disliked Jews from way back, and we are going to see that play out as well. That's why I told you at the beginning to remember that the bad guy in this story is an Agagite, and used this way, it literally means somebody who's an anti-Semite, somebody who hates Jews. They have a racial enmity with the Jews. Mordecai is wise, and he just tells her, look, don't mention to anybody that you're a Jew. And as it turns out, his advice was good.
And who was Agagite again?
Agagite is coming up, the guy,
Okay.
the bad guy we're going to learn about. But always remember, he's the descendant of Esau. Yeah.
Verse 15, now Esther was the daughter of Abihail, the uncle from whom Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter. And when it was her turn to go to the king, she did not ask for anything except what Haggai, the king's trusted official in charge of the harem, had advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal palace in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. So something here before, and we're at time, but something here to realize, the party was the 3rd year of his reign. He got rid of Queen Vashti at the 3rd year of his reign, and now we're at the 7th year of his reign. So he has been trampsing in different virgins for 4 years.
There, to begin with, there's a year-long pipeline. Remember, they've got to stay in the finishing school for a year, but this is 4 years. This has been going on, and it's just for perspective. But I know what. Here's the last thing. This guy who's in charge of the virgins likes her, and the way this routine works, when it's their turn to be taken into the king, they're allowed to take anything they want from the harem. That's jewelry, that's clothing, that you name it, they can, I mean, if they do some little silk scarf dance, they can bring, I mean, they can do whatever. This is a tryout. No, that's what this is though. They try and think, what can I do to impress the king? And if you think it's a good idea to take that in there, go ahead. But the guy who's in charge likes her. And he says, look, honey, I've known him forever, right? You go marching in there like that, you're going to be a one-nighter. Keep it simple. Yeah? Keep it simple. Dress like this. And Esther, to her credit, knows this guy knows, and she does what he instructs her to do. She goes in, and it says that everybody, she won the favor of everyone who saw her. It may be that being in costume doesn't endear you to a lot of people. I don't know. I'm trying to make this so you know, get the general picture, but a lot of women probably decide to do a lot of fancy things, and it's just not impressive to a king who has everything. She goes in according to the instructions of this eunuch, and it works for her. And we're at time.
We don't know if it works for her because that's next week.
Huh?
I said, we don't know if it works for her because that's next week.
Spoiler alert, it works for her. It is written. God, we live in a world that's so much like this story. We live in a world where people do things that certainly are not pleasing to you, shouldn't be pleasing to us, and we don't have any other world to go live in. You prepare us. You make us salt and light to a world that doesn't know any better. And then you leave behind words, you leave behind instructions and examples for us to learn from. And we're grateful. We thank you for that. We miss the message too often. We get caught up in the details and we miss the bigger picture. And the picture is that your hand is on this place and on us, and that we know better. Remind us, always remind us of that. Let the words that we get from these things stick with us. We find ourselves in situations and we recognize they're broken, but they're broken from a lack of understanding of you. They're broken from a lack of communion with you. That's our job. Remind us of it. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, you guys. Have a good week. Anybody who lives here, we have a book club today at 4. Don't forget it. We'll be good. So, thank you
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Have a good week.
week.
Bye-bye.